Hi, everybody. Welcome back once again. This is Mark Lawrence, and we're all set to go against the spread as we review the AFC football conference. With the pig in the air right now, the teams are in NFL training camp, and I'm here with a cast of experts. We're going to discuss the AFC starting today. With that, I want to welcome in our co-host Victor King from King Creole Sports. Victor, it's nice to have you back in the saddle again, bud.
Thank you guys very much. I've been laying low from a handicapping perspective for a few months, actually, since the Super Bowl. But as I always say, guys, this is an honor for me to be amongst some of the greatest, sharpest minds in the handicapping industry, not to mention a couple of guys that I almost consider a little bit of a mentor. So this is a thrill for me. It always is a thrill for me. Again, as I mentioned, I've been laying low, but still doing a lot of work on our playbook publications. As most folks know, the Playbook Yearbook magazine is out. It came out just a couple of weeks ago. There's our man Andy Reid on the cover. The Chiefs going for 3 in a row. And not to mention, guys, we just had a brand new newsletter come out today. Our first Playbook newsletter of the season. It's issue number 1. It covers the entire 3-4 week NFL preseason, 24 jam-packed pages. It looks great when you print it up, guys, but even better, if you got a color printer at
Oh,
home,
yeah.
it really pops. So check it out. Our playbook preseason issue number 1. We've been working very hard on that. We're very proud of it, and we're looking forward to turning a profit in the preseason as well.
And we're going to do that, Victor. We'll talk about that in just a little bit about the preseason. Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com. I know we talked last week about the college football group of 5 teams. Now we're back for the AFC East and the AFC North this week. How's that meet your satisfaction, Andy?
Well, with every day that passes by and every bit of information that comes out of training camps, we're closer to the start of the regular season. And we're doing this on Wednesday. So tomorrow night, August 1st, is their first appetizer, the NFL preseason with the Hall of Fame game. We won't get to see many starters really throughout. I think the other day the Jets announced Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play in the preseason, but we'll still get a look at a lot of players who will be making opening day rosters. We'll get to see how a lot of these rookies are going to fare. They'll get some, maybe I won't say extended playing time, but at least some decent playing time as the coaches evaluate it now that we're down to just 3 regular preseason games instead of 4. And if the NFL has its way, it'll be cut to 2 in a couple of years as they go to an 18-game regular season schedule. It goes back, I think I talked last week, you go back to the early to mid 1970s when they had 6 preseason games and a 14-game regular season schedule. So 20 games, 30% of which were preseason.
And the tickets cost about $20 a piece, yes. I remember.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking about big guns, I want to welcome Jim Feist back to the show. Jim has been off a couple of weeks. Jim, how's everything going through in Las Vegas these days?
Well, good news and bad news. The good news is football is close. The bad news, I always have a rough start after the All-Star break in baseball, and that continues again this year. The NBA will be back, but on a personal and business note, we all lost a friend and person that really helped build this industry. I go back 40 years with Dave Koken, and he passed away yesterday. And it's hard to talk about because we're friends and co-workers. And Dave reached a lot of people. Any of you in Las Vegas knows that he was on radio. He was the sports voice of Las Vegas for a long time. And every place I go, they ask how he's doing and stuff, and they call him the sports voice of Las Vegas because he was on the local radio forever. He had battled cancer for a long while, and he fought it for. I mean, they didn't expect him to last as long as he did, but I think that if you say that he's in a better place because he wasn't in pain, he's not in pain now. So he went into hospice, and a couple days later he passed.
Well, our thoughts and prayers are with Dave, and looking upstairs, we're going to wish him nothing but the very best because he was nothing but the very best to this industry, as you mentioned, Jim. He touched a lot of people's hearts, and a lot of people knew of Dave Koken. Very, very difficult to hear of his passing. I know he did suffer. He had cancer, and he battled it long and hard. You said he didn't expect to last as long, and which tells me that he bet the over on the timetable, and he cashed that ticket too. I'm sure he did. Andy, did you know how well did you know Dave Koken?
I knew Dave fairly well. In fact, Jim and I played golf with Dave a couple of times so many years ago. And in fact, I remarked when Dave first publicly went with his situation about a month or so ago, I reminded Dave of that. He had a perfect memory because I remember we were playing and Dave had like one of the best rounds of his life. He had, I think, a couple of birdies or something to close out the front nine up at, I think it was Paiute. And I think it was the three of us, and Dave remembered that as if it was yesterday going on. And one of the things I remarked when I heard of his passing yesterday was just what a wonderful person he was. First of all, his attitude in battling cancer reflected his personality. You talked about possibly betting the over as far as the length of time he was given, but he also, as he announced that he accepted what was going on, and he didn't want to take anything in the way of medical treatment and everything. He said something like along the lines of, well, let me put it this way, for those of you who are expecting a Christmas card from Dave Koken this year, it ain't going to happen. And he sort of said something like that. I mean, he really came out and was very humble about his situation, didn't burden anyone, and people were more than happy to chat with him. His friends, contacting him either by phone or by text or he was handicapping and following things right up until the end. But he also had a lot of outside interests. I know he was very big with the Animal Society, the Humane Society here in town, doing for pets adoptions and everything. He loved cats. He had cats who just seemed to be a total part of his life, and I think he said something. He might feel differently if my life sucked, but it didn't. So I can accept everything, something along that. Now, he was very wonderful. He had a very distinctive voice and a very distinctive look, because you can always see him with the Kangol cap on, and if you heard him on the radio, you know exactly who it was from the voice. And of course, Jim, you remember when Dave was doing all those shows, and he got me involved with Lee Pete and radio back I was still in Arkansas at the time, and we've maintained touch over the year. He will be sorely, sorely missed, but he'll be remembered often, and whenever we think of Dave, we'll be smiling.
That's true.
Always in the kindest of ways. R.I.P. Dave. Our heart is with you, bud.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's continue on with our show here. I mentioned we're going to preview the AFC conference. We're going to start with two divisions this week. We'll wrap it up with the other two divisions next week. We're going to preview the AFC East and the AFC North on the show this particular week, breaking down both of these divisions. And I'm going to, before I turn it over to a roundtable here, what I want to do is I want to find out from Andy, Jim, also our host Greg DePalma from Prime Sports Network, about how they approach handicapping the National Football League. It changes each and every year. The players do, with free agency and trades and so forth and whatnot. And I'll tell you that this segment is being brought to you by the Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine, and they're literally flying off the shelves right now as we speak. Seriously, guys, if you really are interested in having a copy in your hands, you need to call the Playbook office today at 1-800-PLAYBOOK or log on at playbooksports.com. They are still in stock at the Gamblers Book Club in Las Vegas. They always order a batch, and they always come back and reorder another batch. And we also got the PDF version this year, so if you can't take it with you, you'll also have it on any device you want. So check it all out at playbooksports.com. Talking about how we're going to prepare for the NFL football season, a little bit of review from me is what I mentioned here the last 2 weeks, and how I go about preparing for a new football season, especially on the NFL side of things. And it always starts with that Preview Guide magazine, because from it, not only did I help put it together, Victor did an enormous amount of work in it as well, and the staff also as well. But what it does is it prepares you for the season. It gets you ready for a new football season. And in doing just that, we can refer back to the magazine and find out exactly where we want to go. I always start out, as I say, with the 4-year statistical review on every football team to find out how they actually performed last year. Were they real or were they phony inside out? When I say were they real, did their cuffs and collars match? Did their stats and their record match? Or were they phony in that particular sense? And you take a look at, if you look at this teams this year, you'll find there's a team, the Dallas Cowboys, who went backwards straight up against the spread, but they were actually better in the stats this year, which is always an indicator to me to look for improvement from teams just like that. While on the other side, uh, Las Vegas, you take a look at the Raiders, Vegas Raiders, their stuff was all inside out last year. So, while Dallas improved those stats, I look for them to come back, and I see Vegas a phony football team from last year. That's a starting point for me. I'll also take a look at the coaches, and they're always important when you're handicapping games from a coach's perspective. And when I'm looking at the charts here, the first thing I'm looking at is which coaches have improved against the spread steadily, like a ladder. They're climbing a ladder going up, or they're climbing a ladder going down. And I think to nobody's surprise, you'll find right now that Dan Campbell over at Detroit, you look at his against the spread mark since he's been with the Lions, each and every year in his 3-year tenure, the Lions have gotten better against the spread each and every year. The question is, when will it catch up with him? And it probably will at some point because the prices are being adjusted accordingly, and they will be again this year on Dan Campbell. On the other side of the coin, there's the Dennis Allens of the world. He's gone backwards against the spread each of the last 4 seasons. So keep that in mind. And finally, the last thing I'm going to look at are the strength of schedule from these football teams this year in preparing for the football season. We do it from a playbook perspective where we not look at the records of their opponents last year, but we look at their projected win totals of their opponents this year. And you add all those up accumulatively and find out who's playing the toughest and who's playing the weakest schedules. Those are always real good starting points. I'll tell you this, that the team that right now is playing the toughest schedule this year is the team that probably doesn't want to hear that. That's the New England Patriots. The second toughest schedule, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the third toughest schedule, the Minnesota Vikings. Then on the other side, the 3 easiest schedules are the Atlanta Falcons, the New York Jets, and the Washington Commanders. So now that we've done just that, I'm going to hand it over right now
Before
to
you
Victor
do that,
King.
Mark, I want to ask
Yes.
you about some of those things. So, first
Sure.
of all, the schedules.
Yes.
Do you, like at the end of the season, do you look back and say, well, here's what the schedule toughness was, or the easy schedules, and how did that work out for the teams? Because we all know in the NFL, there's changes all the time. Last year we had all those injuries at quarterback. Have you done that? Have you looked back? Is that something that you do as part of this, or do you just always just move ahead and don't necessarily worry about what happened last year?
That's a good point. And the reason I brought out the 3 teams on the top and the bottom ends of the ladder is because the 3 teams on the top who do face the toughest schedules have struggled collectively since we've been doing this strength of schedule by way of opponents' projected wins. They've struggled. That's those 3 football teams I mentioned at the top. And the teams at the bottom who do play a cupcake schedule, they tend to cash tickets a lot more than they don't. So that's one of the reasons I do that, is because not only does it project it, it also works out that way.
And how about like for a team like the Jets? I was actually surprised that they have a softer schedule, because I know the first, like, say 4 games or 5 games, that's their tough part of the schedule. They have a really tough start, including they have to start the first game of the season at San Francisco. Then things get really easy for them. So how do you take advantage of the schedule that way when you know that there are certain parts of the schedule that might be a lot easier versus a lot harder?
Well, I think it all comes out in the wash in the end, Greg. It depends upon, you could say that, oh, wow, we had a string of 3 tough opponents, and now we're going to play 4 easy opponents, and then we got a tough one and an easy one. But it all evens out in the end. So, I'm not going to break them down and dissect them on each and every given week. But all I'm going to say is the Jets are going to take on a schedule that's very favorable to them this year.
And then with the coaches one, you have the second one with Campbell and Allen. You said Campbell is going to be tougher, as he should, because he's been doing so much winning lately. And Allen, things are going the opposite way. Is it easier? Which is easier or harder? Is to continue following the track of Campbell or Allen? The good or the bad? Which is easier?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of their success is largely dependent upon the personnel they're coaching, how the rosters changed. Have they had the same coaches, the assistant coaches? That's very, very important in doing just that. In a case like talking about the Detroit Lions and how positive they've been the last 3 years under Dan Campbell, that's terrific. But eventually you're going to pay a price for something like that, and you're going to see it in the point spreads this year for this team. That team last year won more games last year than they did the previous 2 years combined. spread coming back to the returning to the norm. The fact that can they sustain the same pace? I don't think so. I'll have the Detroit Lions on one of my disappointing lists this year.
So it's actually easier. Like if I'm going to bet which way to go, I'm always going to look at the side of, well, I feel a lot more comfortable betting against Dennis Allen than I do betting for Dan Campbell.
I agree. I mean, you look at the situation what Dennis Allen has and the talent he's got. Dan Campbell obviously has a lot more talent in Detroit than the Saints have here this particular football season. So will Dennis Allen continue his free fall? Probably. I don't think there's a lot to prevent that. Even if the running back situation improves for them, I still think that they're up against it. They're in really rather soft division, but I still think they're up against it. And I don't think Dennis Allen is going to be much for the NFL as a head coach here after this year.
And then the last one is the first one you talked about, Dallas and Vegas. Where do you get those stats? Like for the viewer, what are they doing to research those stats? Or are they basically letting you do all the research and then just checking out all of your like weekly newsletters, magazine, all that kind of stuff?
Well, it's real simple. It's all laid out in the 4-year statistical preview. You can look at last year, the 2023 football season. Stacked on top of it is the 2022 football season. So you can see, you just look at their wins, their losses, were they up or they down in each category. You look at how many offensive yards they gained in each of the 2 years and how many defensive yards they allowed. And when you find a team that went up in the yardage but went backwards straight up and against the spread, there's value to that football team like that. Flip it around the other way around, where a team goes backwards straight up and against the spread but improve their stats. That's the kind of a football team you want to be on.
All good.
Okay. All right. And with that, guys, I didn't mean to hog up all the time there, but let's hand it over to Victor King. And Victor, I got to ask you, I know you're chomping at the bit right now. It's nice to have you back on the show. The listeners love having you. How is it you're going to go about approaching this football season this year?
We got to wipe the slate clean. That's number one. Before any season starts, you have to remove all emotion out of your wagers. I'm a big Star Trek, the original series fan. When it comes to gambling, when it comes to handicapping, you got to be a Mr. Spock, stoic, logical, follow the numbers. Don't be a Dr. McCoy, emotional, ruled by his passions. So you've got to remove the emotion from any wager you make. Common sense and objectivity, they go together. Yeah, football is a team sport, but you have to pay attention to individual matchups. My final thing, betting is all about numbers and value in the line, whether it's the point spread, whether it is the over-under line. It's not about teams. And don't forget, when betting totals, be aware of what they call the key over-under numbers in the NFL. The 6 numbers that came up the most last season in the NFL, we make our adjustments accordingly, were the number of 41, the number of 48, the number of 30. It's a little surprising considering that was such a common number. The number of 51, and finally the number of 40. Be aware of the key numbers in the NFL. Wager accordingly. Take all your emotion out of your wagers.
Excellent points. It goes a long way. You remind me going back to, I remember when I'm studying these stats on the National Football League teams and thinking, how are you going to beat this league? And, the first thing you have to do is put tape over the names of the teams. Forget about who they are. Just look at how they're performing statistically and see what they're doing. Are they improving? Is there weaknesses? Are there strengths? And then take the tape off and find out who it is you're looking at and talking about. So that's your Spock, stoic approach to the handicapping. And I love that, Victor. I love it there. Jim, I think Victor makes a lot of sense in what he says.
Well, Victor always makes a lot of sense in what he says. All the guys on this show do, which is why I'm very proud to be part of it and listen to it. One of the things is things change so much. We have offensive coordinators that have changed. We have defensive coordinators that have changed. We have quarterback coaches that have changed. We have injuries. We got teams that are no longer signing players. They got rid of these players, brought in these new players. Kansas City won the Super Bowl, but now they have a different crew of wide receivers. I mean, how is that offensive line going to hold up? See, when you start out, when I look at it, saying, okay, what's the strength of schedule? Well, the Jets start off real rough, and I don't want to get into this. I'm gonna get Greg mad at me because he's a big Jet fan, and I'm gonna poo-poo the Jets. And we got a 40-year-old quarterback that doesn't practice much, and he does what he wants to do. He blames everybody for everything. I'm not a big fan. I'm a big fan of his talent, not his personality. But what happens if an offensive line situation develops with the Jets? And he is not going to be real mobile. He is 40 years old. He's not in the Tom Brady type of health. He doesn't work out like that. Tremendous talent. But when you talk about strength of schedule, is he going to face a team without an offensive lineman? These guys get hurt and they're hard to replace. So offensive lines in the NFL are the reasons we had so many quarterbacks last year having to fill in. We're over 60 quarterbacks started games. I mean, Cleveland had 5. So, and that's a whole nother joke over there with Watson. But, that's why we can't project as much as we would like to think we can because of the injury factors. Now, granted, we talk about head coaches. Everybody knows Andy Reid has done an amazing job. But these new coaches coming in, head coaches, quarterback coaches, defensive and offensive coaches, they make a big difference. Why did the Super Bowl go to Kansas City last year? We said it when we analyzed the game to begin with. It was the defensive coordinator that was the biggest edge in the game for San Francisco or for Kansas City, and that kind of worked out because it was a tight game. Could have gone either way, but the defense for Kansas City outplayed them. And that's I'm kind of rambling here, but that's the way I kind of look at things when we're trying to project things out. Now, I got one. I talked to Greg this morning, and this is college. I saw a line that's not available everywhere, so if anybody can get this line, I would suggest betting it. It's very hard to find, but this is a big country. There's lots of books out there with different options. Alabama to make the field of 12 teams into the playoffs at plus money. Are you kidding me? How can there be really that many teams that they're going to not make the field? I mean, they got a decent coach, a decent quarterback. I mean, it's Alabama. You're going to give me Alabama at plus money to make the field of 12 in the playoffs? I got to bet that.
And I would call that Christmas in July, Jim.
Guy.
Yes.
I'm not even on the college show, but I saw that, that's something you got to take advantage of.
I absolutely agree with you 100%. Andy, what's your take on Jim's philosophy here about approaching the National Football League season?
Well, Mark, I do a number of things that have already been discussed. I do take a look at the 4-year statistical summary that you produce in the preview magazine. One of the things I look at, I still believe rushing is an important part of the game because it allows you to do so many things. So I like to see what teams have done last year as far as what their 4-year tendency has been as far as not just rushing yards per game, but rushing yards per attempt, because you might find teams that rush for a lot of yards, but because they also have a weaker passing game, they tend to rush more, and so the rushing yards per attempt may not be as significant as a team that is a little bit more balanced and has a successful rushing game. So I look at that to see if there's any sort of tendency or trend for these teams over the 4-year period and how those teams are coming in those categories, at least how they shape up for this year. But I'm also a big proponent of analyzing the schedule in many different ways. Now, we've known what the strength of schedule has been since the day after the last regular season ended, because you knew what the teams that they were going to play, because it's based upon where you finish in the standings and who your opponents are going to be. But what you don't know is how that's strength of schedule is going to play out. Like Jim mentioned, the Jets may have an easy schedule, but there are parts of it early on that may be a lot more difficult. So you would figure that they might struggle early. And I like to find teams like that, because if they struggle early, but they're inherently good teams, but they're playing the tougher part of their schedule early, there may be value on them come the middle of October when everybody's given up on them because they're 2-4, and yet those 4 losses have been maybe the 4 teams that made the playoffs a year ago.
Right.
But the other thing I look at is how the schedule plays out, not just in terms of the schedule of opponents, but also home road. For example, Kansas City has one of the more interesting patterns this year. They play 2 home games, 2 road games, then a home game preceding a bye, then 2 road games, 2 home games, 2 road games, 2 home games, a road game, a home game, and 2 road games. So they are going to be very well rested at home in the second of those back-to-back home games. So the time to go against them might very well be in that first road game, which will be the first of back-to-back road games. So I wouldn't be surprised, especially if they're coming off a sweep of the 2 home games, but especially play well in the second of the 2. Maybe they struggle a little bit when they take that first game on the road, which will be roughly a minimum of 3 weeks since the last time they were on the road. And then if they struggle in that first road game, maybe we see a much better effort when they're on the road the following week and the public is looking at them and say, oh, look how well they played at home, but look how poorly they played last week on the road. They're still a fundamentally strong football team, and I think with a better roster for the most part this year than they had last year because of all the dropsies that had wide receivers. So that's what I tend to look at before the season starts, how the schedule plays out, not just in terms of strength of opponent and weak strong, whether it vacillates back or a weak segment, a strong segment, but also the home road possibilities. It's probably more taxing, I would think, if you're playing back-to-back home games, or it's not as taxing rather if you play back-to-back home games then followed by back-to-back road games than if you're home road. Because when you're playing back now, teams have learned on back-to-back road games, if they're in the same part of the country, they'll spend that second week at a venue close to where they played the first week. But if you're constantly going home road, that is a lot more draining. Even it may be the quality of competition is a little bit different. It's not as if you played it in more favorable circumstances. So what I do before the season starts is I analyze the strength of schedule, but also factoring in, are you playing back-to-back division games? Are you playing 2 straight playoff teams from last year? Are you playing 2 non-playoff teams last year? And there's a point system that I use to assign to all those various categories so I can see from a color-coded chart, okay, they're in the easy part, they're in the rough part of their schedule, and that helps me not so much with futures, although, again, if I spot teams, and I haven't finished on this part yet, but I will be over the next couple of weeks, that start particularly weak and they're expected to be a good team, I'll look for, again, the public to be sour on them by the time we get to mid-October, and then we see that team play as well as we expect it to, but we're getting a few points extra value because of the poor record at the start.
And we got the extra game now, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that gives
Game
you a little
17,
bit more time to come back after a slow start.
So, Greg, I gave you good news about the New York Jets schedule. At least Jim kicked you right in the nuts as far as projections goes. And I know they're your team. How are you getting ready for the season, Greg?
Well, actually, this year, really, I put in a lot of my effort towards what I do is I'll put together like a list of stats, say from you got certain next gen stats that I would consider, key stats that I think really matter. Same thing with Pro Football Focus information stats. Then you have just overall information regarding players, free agency. I think that's important because I know you come from more of a numbers handicapping side. I try to also incorporate just how good are the players, how good are the new players, and whether or not I believe that those players will mesh well with the new team. And I think the more knowledge that you have with the players and the coaching staff and the scheme changes each year, I think will make you a better handicapper. So I think because for me, I can leave all the handicapping stats, say, up to you. So I can go ahead and take a look at the Playbook magazine, and I got, hey, Marc's got all the great information that I don't have to worry about doing myself for statistics on against the spread, obviously, and things of that nature. But I can go in and spend my time on trying to find out who's really good on a roster, on a depth chart, as I mentioned. And I think that especially, again, the coaching staff is important. This is the first year that I've really, really spent a lot of time on the coaching staffs. And I just know that's something that I should have been doing a long time ago, because coaching staffs are so important. Everybody just looks at the head guy, but it's so important to find out, especially if you have an inexperienced head coach. Well, who else is under that head coach? What kind of experience do these guys have? And I've already found out that there were several teams that I look at some of their assistant head coaches and I'm like, I don't even know who these guys are, even though I'm looking at their history. I've never heard of these guys. Now, maybe they turn out to be really good, but for the most part, I think it's a really good opportunity for you to dissect that one staff is superior to another staff, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to break down the overall team, not just players, but again, coaches and how they coach. And you've got all those stats as well, I think is very important.
Well, I would call out what Jim mentioned there earlier, Greg, with regard to coaches. He mentioned about the staffs, the coaching staffs, the defensive coordinators, and the defensive coordinators go hand in hand with the head coach. And you'll find oftentimes when they've been together for a long time, that team meets with a lot more success than they don't. It's when they replace a defensive coordinator in a new head coaching change. Well, there's all the coaches were basically swept out, so there's going to be a new defensive coordinator. But when you bring in a defensive coordinator for a team like a Mike Tomlin, who has been there for a long while, that change was made out of necessity, okay? Not because it was a new regime coming in. So I think it's really important when you're doing your work looking at those coaches to make sure that those defensive coordinators are tied as long as they possibly could have been at the hip to those head coaches.
But by the way,
Mark,
yes, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, talking about head coaches, I like coaches who are, let's say, not stubborn, and they don't insist on using their system with their talent or their offensive or defensive philosophy based upon the strengths of the team, and rather are able to adapt and let the team play to its strengths regardless of whether or not it's in the coach's background. And maybe the best example of this, Brian Billick got the job with the Baltimore Ravens because of his creative offenses in Minnesota as the offensive coordinator. And what does he do? He realizes when he took over the Ravens, he had an up-and-coming young defense that was outstanding, won a Super Bowl on the strength of that defense. I think, was it Trent Dilfer who was the coach of the Baltimore winning Super Bowls in the
quarterback
yeah.
Dilfer.
Yeah. So that shows you a coach who understands what it takes to win football games. It's not my way or the highway. It's the highway if the highway is better than my way.
That's a good point. Real good point.
One of the examples I was looking at too is, and we'll talk more about it when we talk about the NFC South, is that, for instance, Zach Robinson is their first-year coordinator, and he came from the Rams. And the Rams ran an ungodly amount of 11 personnel this past year.
Which team are you talking about, Greg?
The Atlanta Falcons.
Which team? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So when I look at who was their former coach, Arthur Smith, he ran the absolute least amount of 11 personnel. Now, you might say, well, what does that really have to do with handicapping games? But I think it matters a lot because, again, you take a look at the personnel, and then you realize, well, you know what? This is a lot of work that this team is going to have to do. No matter how many new players they've just brought in, they've completely changed the identity of their scheme. It has to take them a little bit of time, especially if you have a guy like Kirk Cousins coming off an injury. You would think, well, maybe Atlanta gets off to a slow start because of that.
Possibly.
Not only coming off of an injury, but starting with a new team and new personnel.
Yeah.
On top of it, yes.
Arthur Smith didn't do a very good job in Atlanta as a head coach, but he has a very good reputation as an offensive coordinator, which I don't understand why he was so lame in Atlanta with the team that he had. He absolutely called terrible game plans. But so now when he goes to Pittsburgh plays a style that don't turn the ball over and play tough defense. And that's what they did. They played tough defense, didn't turn the ball over, and they end up with a winning record, which is what Tomlin always seems to do, has a winning record. Now they got new quarterbacks. They're kind of retread quarterbacks, and you got Arthur Smith coming in as offensive coordinator, which is better than Canada was, most likely be better, but their defense is strong. So what do you expect out of them? It doesn't seem like he changes with the flow in the NFL. He just sticks with what he does.
Well, I heard that because they were in so many close games that he did a really bad job as far as being a head coach and understanding how to win a football game. and make the right decisions at the right time. As we know, there are so many games decided by a very small amount of points in the NFL nowadays, and I think that's where he really failed the most as a head coach. Now he's being able to take all of those responsibilities away from him, and he can just worry about coaching the offense and let Mike Tomlin worry about that.
It's much easier to be a specialist and deal with one thing.
Yep.
Being a head coach is like you're the CFO, CEO, everything, president of the company. I mean, it's a big responsibility, and not everybody is cut out for that.
There are many examples. Take a look at outstanding offensive coordinators like North Turner, who struggled in the head coaching position, outstanding defensive coordinators like Wade Phillips, who never brought the level of success he had as a defensive coordinator to the position of head coach. And those are just two outstanding examples that come to mind, but there are many others who, I'm not going to say the Peter principle, but there are some people who are better at and more comfortable focusing on one specialized area than in trying to assume too much responsibility and perhaps maybe not being able to delegate as much as perhaps they should.
Guys, I know we're having a little bit of a problem with Jim's microphone. A little bit difficult to hear.
Really?
Yes.
Can't hear me?
Yep. Can you guys hear Jim okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then it's just me.
By the way, and I think, Mark, you cut out a little bit for like about a 10 or 15 seconds.
It was frozen. Your camera was frozen a couple of times. But, just for a couple of times.
That might be the connection.
Now, in conclusion of this segment, guys, when he is referring to personnel groupings, 1-1, we're referring to the skill position offensive players. And 11 personnel refers to one running back on a given play, one tight end on a given play, and 3 wide receivers. That's 11
That's a big
personnel.
difference. That's a big difference.
12 personnel would be one running back, 2 tight ends, and 2 wide receivers. So that's what he's referring to when he talks about personnel groupings in the NFL. Their abbreviations, what an 11 is, what a 12 is, what a 13 is, what a 21 is, what a 22 is. But that's what we're referring to.
Yeah. And that's why it was. That's why with Atlanta, they only had Drake London. Well, we don't really need to worry about a number 2 or number 3 receiver because we don't run a lot of multiple wide receiver sets in our offense. Now they're running 3 wide receiver sets, so they have to include all those additional. So again, that's why I'm saying it's going to be a completely different scheme, and that's why I think it might.
What will he do in Pittsburgh?
Same thing. He's running his offense. You're going to see less 3 wide receiver sets that you probably have ever seen in Pittsburgh, and that's just the way they're going to run their offense. So it's going to be
and more 2 and 3 tight end sets.
And doesn't that sound like it should work better for Pittsburgh because they have 2 excellent running backs?
Right, and they have a decent stable of tight ends as well.
By the way, with the Atlanta,
the first-round draft pick from last year, Washington. So
keep in mind with the Atlanta. With their change in offensive philosophy, it could also be the possibility that defenses have a difficult time adjusting in the first few weeks with what Atlanta is doing. So there are always positive and negatives. And with Pittsburgh is interesting because number one, you've got 2 quarterbacks who have been proven capable at the NFL level. Now, Russell Wilson, of course, towards the end of his career, Justin Fields has shown steady progression in his first few years and adds a dimension. And we might see, the old Antoine Randall L. throw some passes out of the backfield or something with Russell Wilson under center. We might see some very innovative things in that Pittsburgh offense as well because of the fact that they do have 2 capable quarterbacks, though at this stage of his career, certainly Russell Wilson is not really a Hall of Famer. We don't know yet about Justin Fields, but it does give them some additional variations that other teams will have to be prepared for that they might not if they just had one, let's say, permanent starting quarterback.
Hey, guys, it's all great fodder, but let's try and steer this back to the AFC East division now if we can. That's because that's what the title of the show is, the AFC East division.
Can I just say that the Jets will not win the AFC East?
Oh, my goodness.
Jim repeats.
Because that's going to make Greg is going to cut me off.
We're going to have a good time this season.
Because he's going to get mad at me.
If Aaron Rodgers doesn't get hurt, we're going to have a good time.
I sense a side wager somewhere along the line here.
Hey, guys, Victor held up before a copy of the Playbook Preview football newsletter this week. You absolutely have to get your hands on it. It's 24 pages of just jam-packed inside information. You can go onto the website at playbooksports.com, download a copy, and while you're there, also pick up a copy of the Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine, if you will. Now, with that, we're going to visit with all the panels. We're going to go around the horn here and ask each expert if they can share their division winner and their biggest disappointment inside of each of the AFC East division teams this football season here. I'm going to start it out with Victor King from King Creole Sports. And I also want to remind our listeners out there that Victor's total sip sheet is absolutely a must read. You have to put your hands on it. You can download that also at playbooksports.com. And Victor, when do you start that off? The first week of the NFL football season, correct?
First week of the regular season. We're just starting to do the legwork. We've done that over the last few weeks. A nice profitable season last year, and we are, of course, looking forward to another profitable season. And I'm not sure, Mark, but are we supposed to say start the clock, Greg?
Yeah, when he's ready. Yes. Are you ready, Victor?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
yeah,
with
Mark,
that-
go ahead.
Hey, with that, Greg, would you please start the clock, okay?
Oh, here we go.
Well, you
The
know,
clock
guys,
has started.
two-way tie last year. Buffalo, Miami, both 11-6. Jets 7-10. Patriots 4-13. I'll make my prediction short and sweet, and then I'll touch a little bit on some totals information. But I think Buffalo repeats at 11-6. I know they lost some key players. They've lost some players on defense, but I still think Buffalo comes out at 11-6. Miami at 10-7, right behind, one game in the playoffs. For me, the Jets are a 500 team. I think they go 8-9 or 9-8. And then finally, I think it's going to be tough for the Patriots to even win 3 games this year, 3-14. From an over/under perspective, first month of the season, we're going to look to play more Miami overs than unders. I say that because they replaced their defensive coordinator. Remember, we just talked about changes in offensive and defensive coordinator. Vic Fangio, I believe, is on the Eagles now.
Yes,
It's
he is.
going to take time for that Dolphin defense to gel. Meanwhile, we've got McDaniel, we got Tua, we got the fastest team in the NFL. They haven't lost anything on offense. They've added to it. Look for the Dolphins to have more overs than unders in the first month of the season. I'll be looking to play Buffalo unders. They've gone 4-8 over/under in the first month of the season in the last 3 years. The Patriots, even better. They've gone 3-9 over/under in the first month of the season over the last 3 years. So we'll look for Buffalo and New England unders in the first month, Miami overs, and Buffalo to repeat as division champion. They're at 11-6.
Victor, Buffalo Bills, Miami breathing right down their shoulders, and he thinks New England ends up being that big, vast disappointment, as most people around the league seem to feel things will go just that way. Andy Iskoe, how do you see the AFC East shaping up this year?
My opinion of Buffalo has changed somewhat. I was down on them for most of the off season, as is everybody else. And when everybody else seems to be down on Buffalo, with the exception of Victor here, I tend to want to take a look the other way. And yeah, they lost Diggs, who was a huge part of the offense. The team is getting older year after year. I think they've played over the last 5 seasons a total of 10 postseason games, which are equivalent of about just under 2/3 of a season. That takes its toll, even though obviously there's plenty of time from the end of one season to the next. I think Josh Allen still has some very good football left in him, even without Diggs, and he is getting on in his career. And they've yet to get back to a Super Bowl, despite all the talent that he's been surrounded with. But I do think Miami is the best team in this division, despite the concerns I do have for the defense, because their offense is just so potent. I mean, you look at again, I'll take a look at the 4-year statistical trend, and these are significant adjustments. In 2021, they scored 20 points per game. They increased that to 24 the following year, and last year another 4-point increase to 28 points per game. So in the course of 3 seasons, they improved by over a touchdown per game. And the defensive numbers right around 22, 24, 23. So that's been pretty stable, but the improvement has been made in terms of the offense. And Marc, as you can also see, the offensive yardage production has increased, and that's despite the fact with the exception of last year, when they finally started to run the football a little bit better, it's been a increase in their production. So I think that, notwithstanding the issues on defense, I also look at the changes in the kickoff return procedures this year. Miami, with its great speed, That could increase some great field position, maybe greater opportunities to run some kickoffs back. I think that might help their scoring as well. So I'm going to look for Miami to be an over team, but I'm also going to look for them to just edge past Buffalo. I could see Miami with 11, possibly 12 wins. I think Buffalo will still be a double-digit win team, but maybe at the level of 10 or 11 as opposed to the 12 or more that they had shown for the previous 4 seasons. So I'm going to look for those to finish top. I'm more optimistic on the Jets than Jim is, but less pessimistic.
Anybody's more
than,
optimistic
than
about the
Greg
Jets than
is.
Jim.
Well, if he says he's going to finish last, meaning behind New England, that's about as pessimistic.
No, I didn't say
No,
that.
no.
Oh, okay. You just said they're not going to win the
no,
division.
no.
That's
He's
right.
not
wouldn't
on
do
record
that.
yet, guys. Not on
Right.
record yet.
I didn't say that.
But yeah, right. I apologize. You said they will not win the East, which means that, well, let's say they're going to finish behind Buffalo and Miami. I think that they do look like a 9-8 or 8-9 team, but I think the upside is greater than the downside, barring significant injuries. We don't know how good the Jets would have been last year with Aaron Rodgers playing even 2/3 of his season because the defense was so productive. And the offensive skilled players like the wide receivers, Garrett Wilson, etc., they were catching passes from a quarterback who is, even at the ending of the Aaron Rodgers' career, the quarterbacks that were throwing to these receivers last year are far less capable than what they'll be catching from this year, assuming Rodgers stays healthy. And I like the defensive strides that the Jets have managed. The fact that they won as many games as they did with really little in the way of quarterbacking, but a pretty good defense that bore a lot of pressure to keep them in football games, suggests that if they can get a modest to more of a modest improvement, they could be a 10-win team and be a contender. The reason why the Jets might be pessimistic is if the defense can't play up to the level, or hopefully a little bit above, than they did last year. Then we're looking at mediocrity, or perhaps even a little bit worse. And then New England will be competing, I think, again for a top 3 draft choice.
All right, Jim, we're waiting to hear now. Where do you have the New York Jets? Obviously not on top in this division. I don't think you have them in the cellar. And if not, who do you have on top and in the cellar in the East?
The Patriots, who are going to have a tough time winning, as you said, 3 games. So I think that here's the problem with the Jets. I like the coach as a defensive coach. He does a great job. He did a great job last year, and the quarterbacking there was terrible. They couldn't produce a lot of points. So by not being able to produce a lot of points, it takes a lot of pressure off your defense. Has to hold the other team down. Everything changes if they start scoring more points because the other team's going to try to score more points. So a lot of those statistics will change based on what the other side of the ball does. Now, Aaron Rodgers is absolutely one of the most talented quarterbacks that ever played the game, but I don't see him as focused as he was 4 or 5 years ago. Actually, his last year in Green Bay was not all that good. Last year, unfortunately, he got hurt, so he didn't really get to play. But his dedication, his focus on what he does, I don't think is there. I don't think he's as hungry. He has very full pockets, a lot of money, good-looking guy. New York's an exciting place to live. I don't see it. I just don't see it. I think the Miami Dolphins and the Bills are clearly better than the 2 teams, the Jets and the Patriots, and the Patriots are absolutely, possibly, and probably the worst team in football. So the way I see it, Miami wins the conference. The problem I have with Miami, and I will say this up front, if Tua he's got to stay healthy, and then the problem at the end of the year is when they start playing in bad weather, cold weather. I don't know how they will react because it hasn't been a good stat for them over the years. So they're traveling to cold weather. It's not the same as playing football in Miami in September. And that's going to be a problem. Bills don't have a problem with the cold weather. They play in there all the time. But I do like the weapons Miami has, and Victor pointed that out. They have, and Andy's pointed it out too. They've increased their scoring over the years, and if they can play decent defense, they're going to be very tough to beat. the end of the year could be a problem in bad weather. That's one caveat, one thing I have to say about it. But I see Dolphins winning, Bills second, Jets third, Patriots fourth.
By the way, one thing to support what Jim was saying, the Jets last year in their 17 games, 9 times scored 13 points or less, including a 6-game stretch in which they scored 13 points or less. So that's a huge need that they need to be able to overcome, because as Jim pointed out, that puts just too much pressure on the defense if you're playing behind an offense that can't even score 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, that was with a second and third string quarterback, which they hope not to see this year, obviously. Greg DePalma, your New York Jets. Where do you have them in division? Don't tell me you're going to pick them to win. And who do you have in last place?
No, I'm putting the Jets where they should be predicted, and that's third. Buffalo deserves all of the credit, and I always usually give teams that have been the champion for a few years. I think it's important that you don't just try to figure out a reason to put another team above that team. So I'm not going to do that. I know Buffalo had some personnel changes. I get that, but let's keep in mind Matt Milano got hurt. He's probably their best defensive player. Von Miller got hurt. He is their top sack producer. Those are 2 huge pieces to their defense he did not have at the end of the season that they will have this year. Throw in the fact that they're going to, even though they lost Diggs, this Shakir kid at wide receiver looks like he's developing well. They added Curtis Samuel, and they're going to have to hope that Keon Coleman has, the type of season and career that justifies the selection of him. So I think he might be the key, because he has to be a rookie that really does compete for them, even though they have an excellent tight end as well. And they are dedicated to running the football. So, Josh Allen is really the other main reason why I have to stick with the Bills first. Miami, I'm concerned about the fact that Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are coming off injuries. Not sure when they're going to be healthy and when they're even going to be ready to play. So that's something to keep an eye on them early in the season. I also am concerned about their offensive line. They lost their best lineman to free agency. They've got an injury or 2 there. They were already a kind of a iffy offensive line to begin with, so I'm a little concerned about the offensive line there. And with the Jets, it's all about Aaron Rodgers. That's it. There's nothing really else to say there. For me, if he plays the entire season, they are a lock to make the postseason. If he doesn't, or if he misses he could still even miss 2 or 3 games, and I still think they're a lock to make the postseason, because their talent level is even that much better than it was last year, when a lot of people were excited about the Jets. The defense is fantastic, and the offensive line is much more improved. And we all know about New England. And as far as the disappointing team, New England's the easy one, but I think if we're going to make a prediction, I think it's going to be obvious. It's going to be either Buffalo or the Jets. It's going to be, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't produce, or if he gets hurt, it's going to be another bad season in New York. We've all been used to it. But Buffalo could end up being the most disappointing team because of all the players that they lost, and that maybe it's just time for a new head coach, because we saw last year that if they didn't make that run at the end of the season, it's quite possible McDermott might not have lasted for another season. So I think that's something to keep an eye on early in the season.
Well, Greg did not favor his New York Jets, possibly in the playoffs, if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy all year. But he's with the Buffalo Bills as well. New England as everybody else on the bottom of the pack. I'm going to stick with the Buffalo Bills to win this division here, and I like them for a couple of reasons, guys. Number one, it's a football team last year that when they made a change at the offensive coordinator position, everybody was up in arms. It's like, my God, what are you doing? You're breaking up what's been good and so forth and whatnot. All they did was went 6-1 with their new offensive coordinator to end the season. I think they ended on a real sharp note, and I think this division is winnable. I don't think there's anybody in that scares Buffalo. My most disappointing team, I'm going to look right out my back door and look at the Miami Dolphins this football season here for a couple of reasons. Number one, the injuries that they do have that Greg mentioned. They lost Christian Wilkins on the defense as well. That's going to hurt this football team. And they struggled mightily against a winning football team since Mike McDaniels has been their head coach here. I mean mightily. It's not even close. That and the fact that, and I alluded to this last year, and it has to change this year, or Miami will be dead in the water. There'll be a dead fish in the water. McDaniels gets outcoached in every game during the second half of the football season. All you need to do is open up the box scores and take a look and see what Miami did in the first half and what Miami did in the second half, or more importantly, what the opponent did in the second half, because Mike McDaniel did not make adjustments. He has to do that. And if he does that, they can become that good football team. But until then, I'm going to make them my most disappointing team. Let's move over now to the AFC North. And Greg, I'm going to alert the alarms and say start the clock, if you will, for the AFC North division.
And by the way, we ended that segment almost a minute early. So
we did.
Yeah, we did a good job there. And Andy is actually going to lead off with his predictions once you set it up, Mark, for the North, because he's got to run.
Okay, let's do that. Let's set it up here right now. We're going to share the podiums here. Once again, the Playbook magazine. You can download it now. Call 1-800-PLAYBOOK or log on at playbooksports.com. And Andy, I'm going to hand the AFC North division over to you.
Well, thanks, Mark. And, of course, this division, every team had a winning record last year, and that includes Cincinnati, who played without the injured Joe Burrow, who probably, once again, his health status will determine the fate of Cincinnati. The two teams that I have liked, and, again, both have coaches that have been there. I think they're both longest tenured coaches now, Mike Tomlin of Pittsburgh and John Harbaugh of Baltimore. They just seem to make the right decisions personnel-wise and using the personnel to their best abilities, and I would not be surprised if they finish 1-2 in the division in either order. We all know about the non-losing record fashioned by Tomlin throughout his career, and again, we're not talking 5 years, we're talking like 16, 17 years. Harbaugh, he's had a few down years, but he's also had a couple of outstanding years, including recently, although the number one seed did not work very well for him his last time. Cleveland, I'm not so sure about. We've remarked in the past how remarkable it was that they won as many games and made the playoffs last year with 5 starting quarterbacks. Shows that they have talent, and they did so also without Chubb for a majority, most of the season actually. And so they have a nice upside if Deshaun Watson can play the kind of quarterback that he showed early in his career elsewhere, and if Chubb can stay healthy and returns relatively healthy, because the defense is very solid. I could see all 4 teams making the playoffs. I could see. Now remember, these teams only play 6 division games. They can go 3-3 against each other, which means that there are still going to be 11 games outside of the division that can decide what these teams can do. And I think all 4 of these teams are capable of winning 7 or 8 of those non-division games, of those 11 that they play, which means I could see all 4 teams winning 10 games or more, much like, I forget who it was last week, who believed that all 4 teams in the maybe it was Tony, who felt that all 4 teams in the NFC South would finish with losing records. So I could see the AFC North doing the exact opposite of that. I will go with Pittsburgh to win the division, simply because, again, you know how much I criticized the Justin Fields situation in Chicago. Gives more flexibility to the Pittsburgh Steelers. If Russell Wilson gets the starting job and ends up not being able to produce, they've got a capable backup to take over, or they do have the opportunity to do things with both of them on the field at the same time. And we always know that Pittsburgh places a great emphasis on protecting the football and playing outstanding defense. As much as I would like to put Cincinnati second, because I do like Joe Burrow, I am a little bit concerned about the T. Higgins situation, the contract situation that he's facing, and you have to wonder how that takes away from perhaps the intensity level. Will he be playing at 100% intensity or 95%? Big difference between those 5 numbers. I'm going to go with Baltimore. Harbaugh, the team that I mentioned, the coach. I like Lamar Jackson. He's got some decent talent around him. I will put... I keep going back and forth between Cincinnati. I just like what Cleveland did so much last year, and I'm going to say that Deshaun Watson will play at least half of the games better than what they got out of 8 of their best 8 starting performances last year, spread out amongst the 5 quarterbacks. So I'll go with, as much as I don't want to see Cincinnati finish 4th, because I think they're a more talented team, because of my strong opinion about the quality of this division, I will go Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati.
Well, it is easily, hands down, the toughest division in the National Football League. It's tough to determine who a last-place team in this division will be. Victor, you're from Cleveland, Ohio. You know the Browns inside and out. You know the division inside and out. How do you see it shaking out?
Andy's got to say goodbye.
One thing, I will just say so long to everybody. I will look forward to a full show next week, and I think we're going to have a full cast next week perhaps as well. So good luck to everybody this week, and next week we will I'll be happy to talk about the results of the first preseason game tomorrow night.
Very good, Andy. Thanks for
Take care,
your
guys.
There,
all your
Andy.
contributions.
Thanks.
Andy.
All right, Victor, I'm going to roll it back to you, bud. What do you think about this AFC North division that is obviously the toughest in all the National Football League?
Andy touched on most of the pertinent stuff. Best division in the NFL last year from top to bottom. You got that right. Again, all four teams had winning records. But Baltimore 13-4, Cleveland 11-6, Pittsburgh 10-7, Cincinnati, even with Burrow injuries, went 9-8 as well. First place odds, according to the current odds that I studied today, Baltimore a virtual pick 'em at plus 120, just about to win the AFC North Division. Cincinnati at plus 175, Cleveland at plus 550, Pittsburgh at plus 700. I think of the four, there's probably the most value on a team like the Bengals. I think they have the easiest schedule of the four teams based on their last place finish last year. And one thing that kind of scares me a little bit about the Steelers and even our hometown Browns, and I may be going against my mentor on this one, but Lady Luck planted herself very firmly on the side of both Cleveland and Pittsburgh last season. In 5 games, let me see here, decided by 3 or less points, the Browns went a perfect 5-0. So you got to expect some sort of regression on that front. The fact that they even went 6-2 straight up in games that were decided by 7 or less points. That was on the Browns side. And as for the Steelers, 9 of their 10 wins came by 7 or less points last year. In 11 games decided by 7 or fewer points, Pittsburgh went 9-2. I have to think there's going to be regression on both sides. I got Cincinnati winning the division, and I like the current odds. I've got them going 11-6. I've got Baltimore going 10-7. I got Pittsburgh 9-8. I got Cleveland even at 8-9. And again, I might be going against Marc on this one, but that's the way I feel. One more thing about the Browns before I throw it back to you guys. What a interesting team from an over-under perspective last year. Cleveland home games went 2-6-1 over-under, 75% under the total, only 36.2 combined points per game when Cleveland was at home last year. But when they took to the road, they were perfect for over-bettors. All 8 of their regular season road games went over the total last year, 54.0 combined points per game. That's amazing.
Wow.
That's 18 more points per game were scored in Cleveland road games than were scored at home last year. So with that said, we go under when Cleveland's at home. We go over when they are on the road. Cincinnati has been a very good under team. Again, in the first month of the season, they've gone 2-10 over under in the last 3 years. Pittsburgh as well, 3-9 to the under in their last 3 years in games 1 through 4 of the season. So in addition to what we said in regards to the division, we'll also take a look at Steeler and Bengal unders in the first month of the season.
Victor King likes in this division the Cincinnati Bengals to bounce back, goes from worst to first, and I think they're the leading choice in Las Vegas to be just that team, to go from worst to first this football season. And he has our hometown Browns bringing up the cellar. Not everybody in Cleveland will be happy to hear that, but we'll see exactly how it all shakes out this football season. Jim Feist, how do you see the AFC North shaking out? It has to be a black and blue division for sure.
Well, you said it. It's the best. It's the best division. Look at the head coaches. Ravens, good head coach. Steelers, good head coach. Browns, good head coach. And the Bengals, good head coach, but not as highly rated as the other 3. Now, Burrow, if he's healthy and can stay healthy, he is a dangerous dude. He can do a lot. Yes, they have some flaws, but I can see why a lot of people are going to pick them. But he's got to stay healthy, and he hasn't been able to do that. So we talk about Tua all the time. We talk about other people that consistently get hurt. Well, he's another one. So, yeah, they they can be good even with their backup. They can play well. I mean, they're a good team. The Browns have, I think, enormous talent. I never could understand what happened with their defense on the road. At home, their defense was amazing. And Victor pointed out they were an under team at home. But on the road, they just gave up, even in the playoff game against Houston. They got destroyed. Their defense didn't even show up. They stayed on the bus. So why? I don't know why. And I don't think anybody's really explained why. I've not heard that explanation. So now, the Ravens, great team, great quarterback, great coach, and they add a big guy, the big guy in the backfield, Derrick Henry. What does that do? He's not going to have the workload he had in Tennessee, but this guy can still get it done, and he can put a lot of balance in that backfield and give Jackson a little bit of help back there. Very dangerous. This is a very, very difficult division. I don't know about Deshaun Watson. I haven't seen this guy play well for 4 years. And I don't know that we can expect him to. I really don't. I don't know what we're going to get out of this guy. It took 5 quarterbacks last year for this team to get to the playoffs and then get blown out. I don't think they can pull that miracle off again. Deshaun Watson's got to step up and earn some money. I don't know what his motivation is. He's got the guaranteed contract. He hasn't had to do anything for 3 years and to make all that money. If he doesn't perform, will they just cut him and pay him anyway? Probably, because they're destroying an entire franchise, paying this guy enormous money. He doesn't do anything. So I'm not very high on him. The other 3 teams I am, but if Deshaun Watson does play and plays decently, not even at the level he was with Houston when he was in his prime, they've got the talent to go a long way. Who do I like? I'm going to come back with the Ravens. I think they got the coaching, they've got the talent, they were there last year. I'm going to come back with the Ravens, then the Bengals, then the Browns, and I think the Steelers, Browns, and they could all tie. They could all have the same record. So I think the third and fourth team will have the same record. So they'll finish basically tied for third.
So, Jim, do you think we could have 4 teams from the same division in the playoffs?
Yeah, as crappy as the rest of the league is, yeah, that's possible. You could have a lot of bad teams out there. And these guys, if they can all go 500 or above.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Greg DePalma, AFC North, my hometown division. How do you see it shaking out?
Well, I just noticed that we have 3 different winners with 3 analysts, and I'm going to make it 4. So I'm picking Cleveland, and I don't know. Maybe I feel I've always been actually a Deshaun Watson fan. Unfortunately, we all know what happened, and I'm willing to give him another shot based on what I saw from him last year in the Baltimore game, when he won the game in Baltimore, and he did it with a separated shoulder. I mean, the guy should have been carted off the field, and he still played. It showed guts, showed that he's not all in it for the money, in my opinion. It was one game, so that's why I want to give him a shot. Maybe I feel that way because of Aaron Rodgers as well. Give these injured guys, these underperformers a shot, that if they go out there and play, that they can make it work. Plus, Cleveland is 40-1 to win the Super Bowl. Pittsburgh is 50-1 to win the Super Bowl, and yet Baltimore's 10-1 and Cincinnati's 13-1. I mean, why wouldn't I take Pittsburgh and Cleveland at 40 or 50 instead of Baltimore and Cincinnati with those odds, when we know this division is completely tight one way or another? So, what was that?
Excellent point.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. So, but anyway, as far as the rest of the only thing I am concerned with, by the way, with Cleveland is no Bill Callahan. I'm very concerned about that. He's such a great offensive line coach, the best in the game. He's gone. So how will that affect them? With Pittsburgh, they're going to be bringing in 2 rookie offensive linemen. So we got 2 rookie offensive linemen and Russell Wilson. and a new offensive coordinator and a new scheme. That's a lot of changes on Pittsburgh's offense. By the way, they did steal Patrick McQueen from Baltimore, the linebacker, so that's a big advantage for Pittsburgh, negative for Baltimore. Baltimore's got several new offensive linemen, so keep that in mind. They do have Derrick Henry. That's going to be very interesting. They're a run-first team, and now they got Derrick Henry. That could be very dangerous. But they have a new defensive coordinator who's 32 years old, has no experience at this at all. Just played with the Ravens about 5 years ago, so I think that's something to keep an eye on. And with Cincinnati, I've been the biggest Cincinnati backer for the past several years because every time I've noticed, especially because they get off to slow starts and their odds wind up being inflated, and I jump on them, and usually it works out. Last year it didn't because Burrow didn't finish the season. But now they're starting off with a lot of respect at 13-1. To me, I think that's over respect. I like them, but as Andy mentioned with T. Higgins, I'm a little concerned with that. And I don't know. Like I said, I just think that this division is so tight that I'd rather just roll the dice with teams like Cleveland and Pittsburgh than the two favorites.
That's Greg DePalma, whose horse racing analogy is a lot of the same as well. He'll look for those value horses that are going off at 10, 15, 20-1 that are in roles and situations that they've not lost before. So I can completely understand where Greg's coming from with this. I'll start it out here. My AFC North division winner will be also the Cleveland Browns. I agree with Greg 100%. They were the only team in NFL history last year to make the playoffs that started 5 different quarterbacks. And the one quarterback they're going to start this year, Deshaun Watson, I believe this is make it or break it time for Watson. And I believe he has all the physical skills to do just that. They're also going to add the best running back in the National Football League into the lineup this year and have him for hopefully most of the whole season in Nick Chubb. So that's a nice 1-2 punch to the offense that was lacking or missing most of the season last year. You're talking about a team with the number 1 overall defense in the National Football League. And you're getting a boatload of odds, as Greg mentions here. That's all about value. And I think the Cleveland Browns are just loaded with value coming in the situation just like this. My most disappointing team in this division, I think, will be the Baltimore Ravens. And largely because I am not a huge Lamar Jackson fan. I know this guy's won MVP awards and he's done this and he's done that. But you look at his home road dichotomy. Now, I'll share these with you guys. At home in his career, he's 31-12 outright and 18-24-1 to the spread. On the road, he's 28-11 outright and 25-12-2 to the spread. So he wins all his money on the road and he burns it at home. But look at the schedule that they're playing this year for the Baltimore Ravens. Their road games this year are going to be at Kansas City, at Dallas, at Cincinnati, at Tampa Bay, a playoff team last year, at the Cleveland Browns, at the Pittsburgh Steelers, at the LA Chargers, who will be vastly improved this year, at the New York Giants, and at Houston, another playoff team last year. They're going to go up against Murderers Row, taking to the road this year, are the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to have to take care of business at home because I think you're going to trip up on the road. And also, you look at Lamar Jackson. In his career, he's just 27-18 outright against teams that don't have a losing record, 500 or better foes. He struggles against the good teams, and he plays pretty good against the guys that don't perform well. I'm going to make them the last place team and shock the world. I think Baltimore will be deeply disappointed this year. Guys, thank you so much for all your help on the show. There was a great show this particular week. A lot of good, solid information here. And once again, I want to remind our listeners out there that you can pick up a free copy of the Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine we've been talking about on the show. All you need to do is sign on to the site, hit the comment button, send your comments. Be sure to put your email in the comments as well, because we'll email you a free PDF version of the Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine, your email on the comment section, and you've got a Playbook Football Preview Guide magazine coming your way. Next week, once again, I want to remind you guys that we're going to be doing the AFC again. We're going to do it to the South and the West divisions, and Tony Mejia will be joining us as well. So for the cast and crew and the experts on the show this week, I want to thank everybody out there for tuning in. And until next week, this is Marc Lawrence, reminding you to always to remember to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.